Yeah, I'm a graduate student, also a Beamline scientist with the SIBYLS group. I've been working on X-ray scattering interferometry for my thesis. So over the last year, things have been kind of weird, right? But I think at the SIBYLS Beamline, we've been able to handle the pandemic with some semblance of grace. And we've even been able to update a few of our systems and upgrade them as we were originally planning. We were able to re-engineer our flight tube, so now that we can actually use the entire area of our Platus detector, which of course means we had to rewrite all of that code, but you know, that's fun for some people. We've also done a lot to upgrade the SEC-SAXS small system, which now includes a way to cool our columns finally, which it's nicer inside of it than it looks on the outside, I promise. But we also now have a fraction collector in line if the samples need to be recollected, and a wine cooler to keep buffers cold, because for whatever reason, this is not a commercially available thing, but it should be. We've also even incorporated mood lighting. So there's that. But what I've been mostly working on for the last few years is this X-ray scattering interferometry. So I've started to develop these different DNA, like customizable DNA gold substrates, where I have gold nanoparticles linked to the 5' end of single-stranded DNA, and then coupling those to make this this substrate, which gives so if you remember from classical physics, the Young experiment with waves, where waves go through two slits a set distance apart, and you get this interference pattern. So the golds in our system works the same way as these slits, but in reciprocal space. So they're essentially slits for X-rays. And so the X-rays hit these and we get this interference pattern. Now the scattering intensity from a SAXS experiment can be broken down to what we call a form factor and a structure factor. The form factor is essentially what most of you are familiar with. This is what you mostly want from your experiments. Is it gives you, molecular morphology, shape, information on the structure. But the structure factor is actually what is governed by the interaction between particles. So either like attractive or repulsive forces. In a typical SAXS experiment, you actually want to get your structure factor to equal 1, which means that you're not getting any extra scattering intensity in the low Q from aggregation of your protein or interaction between particles. For the X-ray scattering interferometry, however, you basically want to do the exact opposite. So instead of removing contribution from the structure factor, I'm removing almost all mention of anything that gives a form factor. So removing the gold, removing the DNA, removing the interaction between gold and DNA. And this generates this correlation scattering factor, which is just giving the distance between the gold particles, essentially turning our system into a molecular ruler at the level of nanometer. So this highly accurate molecular ruler can be used to measure, and what I'm mostly using it for is to measure how DNA will change upon interaction with DNA binding proteins. So for example, the full length molecular ruler could be bent and give us this shift in real space and also a shift in this correlation scattering factor. One project that Aline mentioned earlier that we've been working closely together on is with EM11. And EM11 is a DNA binding protein. It's a DNA repair protein. It has a lot of different roles in DNA repair. But the one that we're mostly focused on in this case is its nuclease activity. So Aline and I designed these substrates, which are gold on either end, and this long region of single-stranded DNA and only double-stranded DNA at the very end to hold the second gold. And then we found that through this, if the metal binding region of MRE11 is inhibited in any way, either through mutation or lack of metal, MRE11 will bind to DNA, showing this shift in the inner gold distance upon bending. But in its wild type form, in the presence of manganese chloride, it will actually cut the DNA, showing this significant reduction in the gold to gold distance, showing that the gold has in fact been cut apart. Now the long-term goal and what we're working on now is to actually use this as a large-scale drug screening assay. And with the help of very talented undergraduates at Berkeley, this is Emily. Emily's on the right, obviously. We've been developing these heat maps, which will take the information from an entire 96 well plate with substrates, protein of interest, and inhibitors or drugs, and will give us what is maybe considered a hit. If you're trying to inhibit, for example, the DNA will not break, and you'll get a little red flag in the wells that it doesn't break. So this is still a work in progress, and hopefully next year, when I'm getting closer to finishing my PhD, I'll have something really nice to show at the workshop. But for my final slide, just because of time, it's become a tradition in my group, starting with the very first presentation that I gave with the SIBYLS group at the workshop. My last slide is always a slide that I showcase one of my secret projects that my bosses don't know about. And for those of you who have been to the workshop before, you've seen quite a few of these. This year, this is a collaboration that I'm working on with Stanford and ASU to essentially do what we're doing on our Beamline, but to include in the high throughput liquid handling system this acoustic droplet sample delivery. So this uses sound and liquid, obviously, to generate these highly accurate volumes of liquid. And so I'm working with these groups to create a system where we have a liquid handling robot, much like we have at SIBYLS, to dispense these, to pick up sample or to run sample and then dispense these droplets at a very specific volume and very specific rate into the beam. So, and that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Questions, and wanted to make sure to acknowledge Daniel for the work he's done this last year. He's done an incredible job at handling all the SEC samples that you guys have sent. He's also been largely responsible for developing the SEC system as it stands today. So yeah, you guys have given him props during your talks. Definitely want to give him props as well. And then also, again, he's working on his PhD thesis sort of on the side with the high throughput. So also amazing.
And the picture probably of Daniel sitting after 16 uses of SEC during the COVID time with the respirator, because during the first time of the lockdown, we had access to the Beamline only with the respirator. So Daniel was collecting probably at this kind of state.